The Gymnosophists of the Meroitic civilization. My decipherment of Meroitic is based on the Kushana theory. The Kushana theory is that a group of East Indian Buddhist scholars introduced the Meroitic writing system to the Meroites. The Kushana hypothesis was based on the following evidence. 1. No African language has been found to be a cognate language of Meroitic. 2. The classical literature says that the Kushites lived in Asia and Africa. 3. The Gymnosophists, or naked sages of Meroe, were Buddhists who came from India. Flavius Philostratus, the writer of Vita Apolloni, claimed that the Gymnosophists of Meroe originally came from India. Given the fact that the Kushana had formerly ruled India around the time that the Meroitic writing was introduced to the Kushite civilization, led to the hypothesis that the ancestors of the Gymnosophists may have been Kushana philosophers. In addition to Philostratus, Heliodorus, in his love story, The Ethiopians, makes it clear that the Gymnosophists had great influence in the Kushite Empire. The Ethiopian Greek, or Ethiopica, was a novel written by Heliodorus. It provides us interesting information on the popularity of the Gymnosophists in Kush. The Greeks called Kush Ethiopia. At the end of the novel, Heliodorus wrote that, "Here ends the history of the Ethiopian adventurers of Theagenes and Chariclea, written by Heliodorus, a Phoenician of Amisus, son of Theodosius and descendant from the sun." This indicates that Heliodorus was black, since he says he was descendant from the sun. In the ancient times, many of the black civilizations referred to themselves as the Sun People. Heliodorus' Ethiopian love story set in Kush indicates that Buddhism was popular in the Meroitic Empire. The Ethiopian is a love story about Theagenes and Chariclea. Chariclea was the daughter of King Hydaspes and Queen Persina of Kush. Queen Persina placed Chariclea in the care of Sisimithris, who was chief of the king's Gymnosophist council. Sisimithris, a Gymnosophist, took the child to Egypt and placed her in the care of Charicleus, a Pythian priest who takes Chariclea to Delphi when she meets Theagenes. At Delphi, the two young people fall in love. On their way back to Meroe, they encounter numerous perils, pirates and bandits. Theagenes and Chariclea eventually meet at Meroe. When Chariclea is about to be sacrificed to the gods by King Hydaspes, the people learn that Chariclea was a princess, and the two lovers are happily married. In the Ethiopian, the Gymnosophists had great influence among the people. In the Ethiopian, Heliodorus said the Gymnosophists are of the king's council. They were even able to encourage the Meroites to give up human sacrifice. "O king," I quote, noted the Gymnosophist Sisimithris, "you should long ere now conclude that the gods welcome this sacrifice that is being prepared for them. Come, let us recognize the divine miracle that has been wrought, and become collaborators in God's design. Let us proceed to the holier obligation and exclude human sacrifice for all future times." If the Gymnosophists were really well known as counselors of the Meroitic kings since Persian times, as noted by Heliodorus, this explains why we find Kharosthi signs in Meroitic. The Buddhists or Gymnosophists wrote their scriptures in Kharosthi. It was only natural that they would include Kharosthi signs in Meroitic when they created the new script to replace Egyptian. W. Flanders Petrie found evidence of Buddhist colonists in Egypt, which he dated back to the Persian period of Egypt, circa 525 to 425 BC. Petrie wrote, "On the right side at the top is the Theban Mongolian, below the Aryan women of the Punjab, and at the base a seated figure in Indian attitude, with the scarf over the left shoulder. These are the first remains of Indians known on the Mediterranean. Hitherto, there have been no material evidence for that connection which is stated to have existed, both by embassies from Egypt and Syria to India. and by the great Buddhist mission sent by Asoka as far west as Greece and Cyrene. We seem now to have touched the Indian colony in Memphis, and we may hope for more light on the connection which seems to have been so momentous for Western thought. If Petrie's dating is correct, this puts Buddhists in Egypt 200 years before Asoka sent Buddhist missionaries to Egypt. Moreover, it adds confirmation of Heliodorus' claim that the Gymnosophists served as counselors to the Meroitic kings. Asoka was a king of India. He worshipped Buddhism. Asoka loved Buddhism and sent out edicts throughout his empire encouraging people to adopt Buddhism as a way of life. There are records from Alexandria that indicate the arrival of a steady stream of Buddhist monks and philosophers. They would surely have contributed to the philosophical speculations and syncretism for which the city was noted. In particular, it seems the original Therapeutae were sent by Asoka on an embassy to Pharaoh Ptolemy II in 250 BC. The word Therapeutae is itself of Buddhist origin, being a Hellenization of Pali Theraputa, literally son of the elder. Philo Judaeus, 1st century AD contemporary of Josephus, described the Therapeutae in his tract De Vita Contemplativa. It appears they were a religious brotherhood without precedent in the Jewish world. Reclusive ascetics devoted to poverty, celibacy, good deeds, and compassion, they were just like Buddhist monks, in fact. From the Therapeutae, it is quite possible a Buddhist influence spread to both the Essene, a similar monkish order in Palestine, and to the Gnostics, adepts of philosophical speculations. Philostratus, in the Life of Apollonius of Tyana, makes it clear that the Gymnosophists lived in Upper Egypt and the Meroitic Empire. The Gymnosophists, as I said earlier, were Buddhists. There were Gymnosophist communities in Upper Egypt and the Meroitic Sudan. The Gymnosophists used Tocharian and Karasi script to write their scriptures. Tocharian is another name for Kushana. This makes it clear that Tocharian and Karasi were important means of communication for this Meroitic population. Tocharian was therefore probably a major language in the Meroitic Sudan, especially among those Kushites who were Buddhists. The historical evidence makes it clear that there were probably two migrations of Buddhists, Gymnosophists, to Egypt and the Meroitic Empire. Asoka was a supporter of Buddhism. Josh Arias P. Thundi in Buddha and Christ makes it clear that the edicts of Asoka, circa 274 to 236 BC, indicate that this ruler sent missionaries to Egypt to preach Buddha's Dharma. Thundi maintains that archaeological evidence exists for a community of Indian sages living in Memphis as early as 200 BC. We know the descendants of these missionaries were still in Egypt over 200 years later because they were visited by Apollonius of Tyana. Asoka used Karasi to write his edicts. The Buddhists also used this writing system to record their scriptures. This means that the Gymnosophists would have had a long tradition of employing Karasi to communicate their ideas in the Meroitic Empire. The Gymnosophists were probably well respected by the Meroites, and some Meroites probably had knowledge of Buddhist teachings and literacy. This is indicated by the simple fact that in the Ethiopians, by Heliodorus, we find these Gymnosophists in such a prominent space. Some Meroites played an important role in Buddhism. Because the Blimea, a prominent group in the Meroitic Sudan, we call Beha today, as noted by Heliodorus and Ethiopians, are mentioned in Pali texts. These Pali texts include the Tipitaka Buddhist texts. Dr. Deret wrote that in early Pali times, I quote, "We have a Blimea, an African and front ranks of Buddhist texts, of very respectable age," unquote. The Buddhist texts where Blimea were mentioned are very old. The Vinyapitaka is dated to the 4th century before the Christian era. If Blimea are mentioned in Buddhism texts, we can be sure that Meroites were not ignorant of Kasrasti, because Blimea was one of the tribes living in the Meroitic Empire. This explains why many of the Meroitic symbols agree with Karasti. They agree because some Meroites were probably already literate in Karasti due to the influence of Buddhism in the Meroitic Empire, even before the Meroites changed their writing system from Egyptian to Meroitic. There seemed to have been a second migration of Buddhists to the Meroitic Empire, many years after Asoka sent missionaries to Egypt. These migrants came to the Meroitic Empire after their king was murdered. Flavius Philostratus, the writer of the Vita Apollonia, claimed that the Gymnosophists of Meroe originally came from India. Given the fact that the Kushana had formerly ruled India around the time that the Meroitic writing system was introduced to the Kushite civilization, led to the hypothesis that the ancestors of the Gymnosophists were the Kushana philosophers. The historical evidence of the Kushana having ruled India made the classical references by Philostratus and other Greco-Roman authors to Indians, the Gymnosophists in Meroe, and it was an important source for the construction of alternative theories about the possible location of the cognate language of Meroitic. There is external evidence which support this theory. A theory explains observed phenomena and has predictive power. I have theorized that due to the claims of the classical writers that some of the Meroites came from India. According to the life of Apollonius, the Indian Meroites were formerly led by King Genghis, who had repulsed the Scythians who invaded this land, India, from across the Caucasus. Philostratus also made it clear that the Indians of Meroe came to this country after their king was killed. In summary, the classical literature of the Greeks and Romans makes it clear that there was a connection between the Gymnosophists of Meroe and Indians in East India. The fact that historical events mentioned in the classical sources are found in the Indian literature confirmed the view that there were Indian Meroites who could have introduced the Tocharian trade language to the Meroites. Sometimes, remember, Tocharian is also called Kushana. Buddhist influence in Kush surrounds the worship of Meroitic god Epidemic. At the temple of Naka, we see a number of examples of Buddhist influence, e.g. Epidemic depicted as a three-headed lion god with 4 arms. Epidemic is also represented as a snake coming out of a blossoming lotus with a lion head. These are all symbols of Buddhism, as are footprints and other imagery that we find in ancient Meroitic Empire. The lotus in Buddhism represents purity of mind and body. The open blossom represents full enlightenment. Other Buddhist elements in Meroitic society was the footprints, elephant, and swastika, seen in Meroitic iconography, and the influence of the karasti on the Meroitic script. The swastika in Buddhism means good luck. It is represented on the Stela of Metteyya, published on page. The elephant in Meroitic art represented strength of the mind and gentleness. Finally, footprints are found at numerous Meroitic sites. In Buddhism, footprints represents the presence of enlightenment and represents the pilgrimage of the followers of Buddhism in Meroitic temples. None of these religious ideas and symbolism are associated with Hinduism. You can find out more about Buddhism in Meroe in my book, Meroitic Writing and Literature. The interesting fact about the use of the Kushana hypothesis in deciphering the Meroitic script is that whereas when the Europeans deciphered or felt that they were able to tell what Meroitic was like, they found no evidence of Meroitic being related to any of the African languages, like Nubian and Beha, and other languages, or even the Semitic language. The most interesting fact is that my deciphering of Meroitic shows that it is related to both Beha, Nubian, classical, colloquium, Sudanese Arabic, and even African languages. What this shows in the sense that not only was Meroitic a lingua franca, the Meroitic writing was also, in a sense, a language that continues to incorporate many elements that were spoken by the original Africans. This evidence of cognition between Meroitic and languages spoken in Sudan today proves that my decipherment of Meroitic is correct. The Gymnosophists lived in the Meroitic Empire. The Gymnosophists helped spread Buddhism, and they were great counselors to the Meroitic king.